Okay, when you look at the FOIL method, it stands for first, outers, inners, and last. Let's look at example 1. We're asked to simplify the product of these two binomials. If you look at the first two terms of each binomial, you have 2x and x. When you multiply those together, you end up with 2x squared. And then when you look at the outer terms, you have the 2x and the positive 4. When you multiply those together, you end up with positive 8x. When you look at the inner terms, you have a positive 3 and an x. When you multiply those together, you get 3x. For the last terms in the binomial, there's a positive 3 and a positive 4. When you multiply those, you end up with positive 12. If you FOIL correctly, the middle two terms are always going to combine, and 8x plus 3x is 11x. So your final answer is 2x squared plus 11x plus 12. Okay, let's look at example 2. We're going to multiply these two binomials using the FOIL method. When you look at the first two terms in these binomials, you have 3x and 2x. When you multiply those together, you end up with 6x squared. When you look at the outer terms, you have the 3x and the positive 7. When you multiply those together, you end up with a positive 21x. When you look at the inner terms, you have the negative 5 and the 2x. Multiply those together, you end up with negative 10x. And then for the last terms, you have negative 5 and positive 7. When you multiply those two together, you end up with negative 35. Now remember, if you FOILed correctly, those middle two terms are going to be like terms and you're going to be able to combine them. And we can, because positive 21x minus 10x gives us 11x. And so the final answer is 6x squared plus 11x minus 35. Okay, do me a favor, for this last example, go ahead and hit pause on the video and see if you can come up with the answer to the product of these two binomials. When you're done, you can hit the play button and I'll go through the final answer with you to make sure that you got it correct. When you multiply the first two terms of the binomials, you have 6h and 2h. Multiply those together, you end up with 12h squared. When you looked at the outer terms, you have 6h and positive 3. When you multiply those together, hopefully you got positive 18h. And then when you look at the inner terms, negative 7 times 2h, you end up with negative 14h. And then when you look at the last terms, you have negative 7 and positive 3. And when you multiply those together, you end up with negative 21. Middle two terms combine, and so your final answer, you should have had 12h squared plus 4h minus 21.